Welcome, everybody. My name is Annie Brones, and I am a education and outreach specialist here at Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. We are so excited to be here at Soil School. It's our third session, and today we're going to be learning about how meadowscaping can help us sequester carbon. So that's going to be really exciting. This is a month-long series of talks. Some of you may have already joined us, but those who haven't, we're really glad you're here now. This is a joint project between Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District and West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. So just a brief little bit about who we are and what we do. Tualatin SWCD works within the Tualatin River watershed to create a sustainable, productive, and healthy environment for the Washington County community. We do this by serving residents and providing educational opportunities, technical assistance regarding natural resource conservation, challenges, and we also provide a little bit of financial assistance too to actually implement those practices. We have great grant programs, and so lots of fun stuff that we offer. Now, West Multnomah's, their mission is to provide resources, information, and expertise to inspire people to actively improve air and water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, and soil health. They serve the residents of Western Multnomah County, Sauvie Island, and a portion of the Bunny Slope neighborhood. They provide conservation planning, weed management, native plants, wildlife habitat restoration, and school gardens. So we do a lot of stuff both here in the Tualatin River watershed and in West Multnomah. Now, just a few things about how this presentation is going to move forward. I'm sure everybody is intimately familiar with Zoom by now. But we're going to allow about 10 minutes of questions at the very end of the presentation. And if you have a question you would like to ask, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A panel. Click that and you can just pop your question in through there. Please don't use the chat box. We'd prefer you to use the Q&A box. Now, if you see a question and you're like, hey, I was going to ask that, or I'm curious about that question as well, you can upvote it by clicking the little thumbs up. And what that's going to do is that'll push the question to the top, and that'll be helpful to me because we probably won't have time to get through everybody's questions. And so if you upvote the ones that really matter to you, then I can make sure that everyone's getting relevant information that they'd like to hear. All of our recordings are all of our presentations will be recorded, and they're going to be posted on Tualatin SWCD's YouTube page. You can find that by just Googling Tualatin Soil and Water YouTube. That'll take you there. We also have a link on our website, which is new and very pretty. So if you haven't checked it out, go see our new website. And we also will have links to a cloud, so you can watch. If you go back to the registration page and click the same Zoom link, that'll take you to a recording as well. But you can also just wait until they go up on YouTube. That might be easiest. All right, so now let's get started. I'd love to introduce you to our speaker today. Laura Taylor is a conservationist and education coordinator at West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. She's currently serving as the interim forest conservationist. Laura manages the monitoring program for rural restoration projects. She coordinates with rural conservationists on project implementation and maintenance. She runs the education program, working with school and community gardens, providing environmental education and community science pollinator monitoring. She's worked for over 13 years providing botanical and ecological expertise to a range of public, nonprofit, and private organizations. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Botany and Forest Ecology from the Evergreen State College, and she earned her Master's in Science in Invasive Species Plant Ecology from Portland State University. So enough of me yabbering on. Let's hear from Laura.
All right, thanks for joining, everyone. Let me bring up my presentation. Oh, it says that my share screen has been disabled.
Oh no, that was supposed to be on. Let's see. Can you try it now?
Yeah, there we go. All the way to the top. Okay. Is it all good now?
Beautiful.
All right. Lovely. Okay, so thanks for joining us for Soil School, and thank you for joining us on this lovely sunny afternoon, evening for talking about meadowscaping and how it can help sequester carbon in our soil. So this is a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, why we would do such a thing, change a lawn into a more diverse meadow, how to design a meadowscape, how to get it planted, and then how to maintain your meadowscape so that it lasts for a long time. And I'm just going to start with this quote by Douglas Tallamy, a great entomologist, who said, "We have to raise the bar on our landscapes. In the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water." And really, meadowscaping is about all of these things and how our urban landscapes can be more than just kind of a monoculture and really be a part of life. So first of all, why convert your lawn? Well, because it sequesters carbon, which is why we're all here. You know, they're the native perennial grasses that we include can really help pump a lot of carbon into the soil. It also helps increase wildlife diversity, biodiversity of plants and insects and all kinds of things. For example, the species of bee you see there is was listed as threatened, and you know, it can survive in a local meadowscape if it has the right flowers and nesting habitat. You can improve your air and water quality through planting meadowscapes. Also conserve a lot of water since you don't need to water them. I think they really tap into the natural heritage of our area and help us connect with the native landscape in a really meaningful way. And there are lower maintenance options available that, you know, mean you don't have to put in a lot of, you know, time mowing and watering and all that. So we'll get into some of the specifics here on all of those things. First of all, I love this diagram here. This just kind of in a nutshell speaks for itself and shows you how a meadowscape can help you improve the infiltration of water into your soil, because all of those big roots from all of these perennial native grasses go so much deeper than the lawn or annual grasses. So if you haven't noticed, there's tons of these native grasses here with deep roots. And then way over here on the left is this little annual, or the Kentucky bluegrass. And you can see how deep those roots go in comparison. And this picture of this fella who dug up a native prairie grass really speaks for itself too. That's just so much below ground biomass. And those roots all create avenues for the water to filter down into. So really, you're creating porosity in the soil that water can filtrate into, and you're also building up all of the carbon from all of those roots in the soil. So that's just, it's really amazing, and it's very exciting to have this like grassroots movement, literally, of spreading this across the landscape. So that was kind of a visual view, but this is a little bit more of the process of how meadowscapes sequester carbon. We'll start at the top here. You're really increasing that below ground biomass, right? All of those below ground roots are built out of carbon-based molecules that they pulled from the atmosphere. CO2 put into the sugars and cellulose that creates the structures of the roots and the plant cells. And then those roots, as they maybe break off or die or get eaten by some bacteria or fungi, increase the carbon in the soil. They feed all of those microbes that really, thrive off of all of the sugar coming out of the grass roots and meadow roots, and then that improves the whole structure of the soil, creates more porosity, more structure, and this creates better nutrient accessibility and water accessibility for the plants, right? They're able to reach those nutrients better when they're held by all of the soil microbes. So then the plants get more nutrients and water, they're able to grow better, which means they grow more roots, and around in the circle it goes, right? So this is a really like positive feedback loop. Because all the soil is so healthy, you don't really need to fertilize it. A lot of the native grasses and meadow species from around our local area in the Willamette Valley of Oregon don't need super high nutrient levels to thrive. And fertilizer takes a huge amount of energy to create if it's produced chemically or artificially, right? So if you don't create a demand for that chemical fertilizer, you're not contributing to that like fossil fuel burning that creates that. Additionally, if you're not mowing, you're not creating demand for that fuel. So there's also lower emissions that you get from this. So, another, I think, really huge, important reason that meadowscaping is so exciting and important, super valuable, is that the local prairie habitat, grassland habitats of our country, and specifically in the Willamette Valley we're talking about, are very endangered now. As you can see here, this was the original Willamette Valley prairie and oak habitat and riparian habitat before settlement. This habitat was mosaic of meadows, woodlands. It was maintained by the Native American tribes of the area, the Kalapuya, and it was super diverse and sustained those tribes, and they sustained the habitats in return through their practices with fire and digging and everything. And it's pretty much all lost. You can see over here now on the right, this is what remains. You can barely even see those patches anymore. And a lot of it's gone to agriculture. Ironically, a lot of that is grass seed farms. And other kinds of farms. I'm not knocking farms necessarily, but it's just the state of our, our culture and where we're at these days. And our urban lawns don't need to contribute to that. They can contribute to bringing back this incredible, beautiful habitat. So there's a lot of little wildlife that you can support just in your front yard or backyard. Pollinators and other beneficial insects and critters are one of those kinds of creatures you can really support. They really just need nectar sources, some ground nesting sites, or places to overwinter. For example, this little native ground nesting bee here was using these little holes in just a bare patch of dirt that was in somebody's lawn, and they build their nests in there. And they're really they're neat bees to support because their stingers don't really they don't hurt people. They're not like honeybees that will like attack you if you bang on their hive, which you shouldn't do. But yeah, so great habitat can be created. And I was so amazed when I started growing, native flowers in my little, patch of meadow in North Portland. I just started seeing dozens of species of native bees. And of course, birds really benefit from the structure of, some native plants around. They need the food and shelter, nest sites, and of course, the native plants are what sustain the native insects that the birds need to feed their young. So it's all connected. And if enough people really get into creating meadowscapes or other kinds of naturescaping, we can really create this connected habitat that those little critters can move from one site to the next and spread around. And the more connectivity there is, the better you can support biodiversity, because one little rare species isn't just going to wink out if their one little patch of ground is missing. So in Steps, the Meadowscaping Handbook, this is the handbook that will guide you through how to do this whole process. So I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. And this is just the table of contents here, just to give you an idea of all the steps. There's the planning element, designing, preparing your site, planting and installing, and then maintaining. And our Meadowscaping handbook also has a lot of other really great things in the appendix, including a whole plant guide that lists a lot of different species that are, you can learn more about the species. It's really helpful. Here it is live. Okay, so starting with site planning, you want to really just start with what your goals are, right? Do you mostly want it to be beautiful? Do you want to just not have to maintain things so intensely all the time? Is your goal really wildlife habitat or stormwater management? You want to think about, based on those things, if you want kind of a low-lying ground cover type project, or just a totally like native grass alternative if you don't really want a lot of flowers, or just a mix of all these in the meadowscape. And as you're planning, these are just some of the things you'll want to consider that you just make sure you think about, that you have. How much labor is it going to take? And different methods might have more or less labor. What tools you might need. Generally, like, the tools aren't particularly intense, but depending on your site prep strategy, you might need to like rent a sod cutter or something. Based on your budget, what tools versus plant materials and site prep materials you're going to be able to get. And then you really want to consider the characteristics of your site. It's really important, and that's going to lead you towards whatever methods and plant materials you're going to be most successful with. So for slope, we're generally aiming for a more level site. Steep slopes, because of erosion concerns, you kind of want to maybe plant those with more like woody things. You know, thinking about your weed pressure is super important. So for example, if you are in a place where you have not that much weed pressure, like everyone around you does a good job at like keeping the weeds down, you might be more able to plant some really like delicate little plants that don't, you know, do well in competition with other things. But if you do have a lot of weed pressure, then you're probably going to want to choose plants that are a bit more tough and can like compete. Yeah, and just thinking about what your human needs might be, like if you're going to want to like walk around or your kids are going to play in it, all those things. And then of course your soil type, moisture. Some plants love a lot more moist soil, others just love dry, gravelly soil. So it's good to know your site and know your plants. So here's just a nice little example of, you know, one place you could put a meadowscape, just like part of a yard under a tree. And, you know, it doesn't just have to be like in the middle of your lawn. You could choose some unused spaces. For example, you know, just that corner between the two sidewalk walkways can be a great place. You know, you don't necessarily want to plant anything tall there anyway, because that would mess with people's visibility on the corner, but a meadowscape is a great little landscape to put in there. So here's one example of an unused space that became a meadow, just this little place between the driveway and a fence and raised garden bed. And you can see how they killed the old lawn here, then brought in some nice fresh mulch and planted these native plants throughout. They put a little paver there so they could reach their garden box still. And then in a year or two, it was all filled in and beautiful. Another kind of unused space, this was a, you know, sidewalk strip under a tree. And since it was a more heavily used area that people might, you know, walk through, there was, you know, a mess of, looks like Douglas aster that they just put in, and it's something sturdy that can fill in and handle it and still provide all of those benefits. So here you can kind of get a sense for like different types of meadows you might put in different places. You know, here's a sidewalk strip that has a Willamette Valley, you know, species. Here we've got the upland meadow that's in the sun. And in the back, we get the wet meadow where you might include sort of a rain garden element where you're, you know, diverting the roof runoff into that space and planting wetlands loving species. So it's, you know, it's always important to choose the right plants for the right place. And of course, there's only so many native plants that are available. You can't just go pick any old species. Like some of them are very rare or just not propagated for whatever reason. And that's always kind of evolving as the nurseries figure out more species that people want. It's always a good idea to try to get 3 bloom times throughout the season, so that you're always making sure that your pollinators and other beneficial insects have some food, some flowers to access. So for example, you would want to make sure you choose a few species here that always bloom earlier in the season, a couple that bloom in the mid-season, and a couple that bloom in the late season. And then, you know, don't forget the bunch grasses, they're important too. The bunch grasses, like I was saying earlier, they make these nice little tufts that are great for like bumblebees to kind of crawl into. The queens need to overwinter, right? So they need to find a sheltered place where they can survive the intense winter. So, you know, there's some bunch grasses here you can choose from as well. All right, so getting into the fun part, the particular plant species. This is just an example of a page from the Meadowscaping Hand Guide, and you can see how there's just the different flower species, nice little picture that shows, you know, how much moisture they need. You know, some are more dry loving, some need a little more moisture, like this tick seed. What sun requirements, how big they get when they bloom. So based on that information, you can really just kind of target and zero in on, okay, I need something that can handle dry, full sun, or whatever your situation is. So as you're developing your meadowscape, you know, there's strategies you can use to basically make it a bit more like a planned landscape, so that it doesn't just seem like a completely random, crazy, wild mess, right? Because you kind of want something that your neighbors are gonna appreciate and that might inspire your neighbors to want to do the same thing. And usually that's something a little more well thought out, right? And it can, all these species can still do their great biological work and be beautiful to the passerby. So if you're using a small area, just pick a couple species, right? It doesn't have to be like a 20 species list, right? Because the fewer species you have in that area are just like a small palette, then it'll still have kind of a theme, right? You'll still be able to see certain plants kind of going throughout. Anchor plants are a good way to kind of create, and that's like a larger species or plant that you put like maybe in the back corner or a few in a certain area. That can kind of create some intentionality. Clumping species is a really good idea for many reasons. It creates an aesthetic look that, you know, makes a sense of like, oh, this is the patch of self-heal. And it's also great for the pollinators because they can see that nice big patch of purple flowers from way up in the sky and be like, all right, that's where we're going, instead of things being all scattered and random. So it helps the pollinators find the flowers easier. It also can help with maintenance, because then you're like, okay, I know this was the self-heal patch. Things that are not self-heal, I'm going to weed out of here if they're a weed. And, you know, there's a lot of other considerations. Seasonal interest is always fun. Things that like are especially beautiful a certain time of year can create that sense of dynamic seasonality in your landscape. So for example, here's a meadowscape where in the beginning, the early spring, mostly you're just seeing the California oatgrass here. That's the Danthonia californica, if you're wondering. And then lo and behold, a few months later, boom, just all Western buttercup and camas. And it's just really fun to see these meadowscapes kind of progress through the season. So I'll go back, prove this the same place. Watch these blue columns. See? That's pretty fun. Another thing to consider with plants is how tall they're going to get, especially for our sort of lawn alternative meadowscapes. We're generally aiming for things that stay shorter. We don't really have a huge number of native species that do stay like really lawn short, you know. So for example, this Douglas aster gets, you know, 2 to 4 feet tall. You don't necessarily want that throughout your entire like lawn alternative meadow, but it might be nice in a little clump in the back or to the side or something. Meadow checker mallow is another one that the main sort of clump of leaves is short, but then it sends up this tall flower spike. So when that's up, it's going to create this tall, airy sort of look. Now, we definitely always like love the native plants at West Multnomah and SWCD. But, you know, I will say that there's definitely also a place for some non-native, non-invasive flower species like the black-eyed Susan here and these cosmos. So, you know, they're mixed in with that tick seed that's native, and this is all amongst some vegetable gardens. You know, it doesn't really have to always be like strictly native if you don't want to. And there are definitely some limitations with our native species tending to not bloom super late. Like there are some species, but there are fewer. So I think especially for the late season, it's kind of, you know, it's okay to augment with some non-native species that won't like spread into nature and become invasive, right? Okay, so you've figured out what plants you want and created this whole beautiful vision. Now, how do you get ready? So there's all these different methods you could pursue. There's sod cutting and then hand weeding like up here. For all of these, you'll want to top dress with some native soil afterwards. Sheet mulching, like you can see in my little pop out, is my personal favorite, especially for carbon sequestration. So for that, you mow the original grass down really short and then cover it with cardboard and then layer on some straw and some compost and some mulch, and you're just basically like smothering the old grass and killing it that way by letting it rot over time. And because it's rotting in place, you're able to infuse all of that old carbon down into the soil, and that creates better moisture retention and carbon sequestration and all the good things. Solarization is another option you could look into. This is a picture of that. So you're using clear plastic for that. And basically the sun shines down through the clear plastic that you've really like anchored down into the soil on all the edges. And the air temperature and soil temperature there gets so hot that it kills the weeds and pretty much everything else in there. So it will kill the weeds and the old grass, but it will also not really help retain carbon in the soil super well. But it's an option if you don't want to like collect, you know, acres of cardboard and mulch and everything, which is a lot of materials to collect. That's how I've done it, and it's a lot of work. For the solarization, you do need to let that go that whole from spring to fall in our climate, because it's just, our climate is not that hot and it just takes that long for all of the heat to build up. If you're open to using you know, ecologically sound herbicide, you can also spray your grass and weeds, and that is also an option if you're open to it. However, of course, you should always follow all of the labels and regulations. But by far, I would say sheet mulching is great. It's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. And, you know, whatever you do, I will say, don't skimp on this step. Site preparation is so important, because if you don't fully kill those old like crabgrass lawn weeds, especially the crabgrass, which I can speak from personal experience, it will come back amongst all of your native grasses and meadow plants. And then it's like, it's so hard to untangle it all and weed that out from your precious little native things. It's frustrating. I went through that this spring. So just do yourself a favor, be patient, and fully kill the old lawn and weeds before proceeding. So other things when you're planting, here are some steps you want to think about. It's definitely recommended, especially for all the perennial plants, that you just start with little plugs rather than trying to do everything from seed. And with the plugs, you're able to plant them in more of an intentional pattern, do your clumping, put your anchor plants. You can just have a lot more control over where things go. You know, if you try to plant everything from seed, then it will literally just all be random. And, you know, if it's not like your front lawn, maybe that doesn't matter. So, you know, you can totally do that. It will also take a lot longer to get established and like fill in from seed. So plugs are great because it's faster establishment and more intentional looking. Great to clump the like species like we were just saying. And if you clump in odd numbers, it's sort of like this weird trick where it looks kind of random, but also intentional. So that's kind of a nice trick. Make sure you give your plants enough space. So that 2-foot spacing is kind of an ideal range for most of our meadow species. And that just gives them enough room to grow and flourish. And if you are gonna seed like some annuals or something, it's good to scratch them into the soil and definitely plant them in the fall. And a lot of people are surprised by this, but fall is the best time for seeding our native species because they have just evolved to, you know, the plants create their seeds and drop them in the fall. So they've evolved to need to experience that winter time, like cold, wet environment in order to key them in that, oh, that's gone, it's happened, now it's done, it's spring, it's time to germinate. And the other thing that's really helpful for establishment in a lot of places is to put up a little fencing, which I totally had to do for my meadow because there are squirrels and cats and random, you know, people who want to sell you vegetables or whatever they're selling you. You know, there are people who are going to walk through, there's animals that are going to dig, and, you know, it can kind of mess things up and be frustrating. So if you need to put up a little fencing to avoid that when things are just like getting established. Okay, so you were wondering, what does Laura's yard look like? This is my my grassy meadowscape when it was just getting started. And this is a good example of seeded versus start planted grass. So the foreground area was planted with California oatgrass. That's this little, it is a bunch grass, but I've seeded it really densely so that it would kind of resemble a lawn, because this was my former lawn. It's like the only place in my yard left that's not like native bushy naturescape. And I wanted just someplace I could like sit and enjoy the rest of my yard. So that's what I seeded. And California oatgrass is a really nice native bunch grass because it stays relatively short compared to a lot of our other grasses. It can be kind of like seeded in a mass like this. It has some good little characteristics that make it easier to identify. Like it has these little like eyelashes on the place where the leaf meets the stem. So if I was ever like, is this my California oatgrass versus some weird weedy brome that came in, I can just like look for the little eyelashes. So I like that one. Then around the sort of mid-ground in this picture, I also planted this Romer's fescue, which is another nice bunch grass. And I planted those from starts instead, so I could actually like put them in intentional places. And so yeah, that's just a fun example there. It worked pretty well, although I will say this is the Romer's fescue area is where I didn't quite fully kill the old crabgrass, and it came in and grew up through the bunches, and that was annoying. Great, so we're getting into our last sections here with the maintenance. And really, you know, after all of the hard work you put in to get your meadowscape planted, it's so important to maintain it. And it's not the worst level of maintenance you'll have in your yard, but you do want to water in the beginning, especially through the first summer. Just watering to get things established is really important. Sometimes you'll want to create a little bit of disturbance, and that kind of mimics, you know, what used to happen in the native prairies, where there would be fire that was promoted by the Native American folks there to keep things meadow instead of turning into forest. But in our case, it can also kind of just help create little gaps that then flowers can come up through all of the grass thatch. There are going to be certain species that are going to want to spread, you know, so-called bullies. They're just enthusiastic. They just like love growing, you know, and so they're going to come and you know, spread out further than you maybe wanted, and you can always just pull them. And you know, you can promote the self-sowing of those annuals, especially by, you know, again, like creating a little disturbance that their seeds can like actually germinate into. You'll want to watch out for weeds, of course, like the dandelions, or hairy cat's ear, more likely in my yard. But you know, if you are gonna do some disturbance, like a single mow per year, make sure that you're not doing it in that April 15th through August 1st window, because that's like when the birds are nesting. I will say also though, be careful for the bumblebees that are overwintering too, because that's outside the nesting season. But I have definitely accidentally like moved a leaf and there was a bumblebee queen over nesting, and I was like, ah, sorry. So just be considerate, do your best. Another great thing you can do for maintenance, especially for carbon sequestration, are these following things. If you do mow, leave those clippings so that they, you know, sort of decay down into the soil and add more carbon. Adding compost is great. It can add a little fertility, but more importantly, it's like all of the microbiology going on in the compost is going to be added to your soil and kind of jumpstart it. And those microbes are what's going to really like add to that like positive feedback loop we were talking about. Biochar is a really neat thing that people are learning more and more about. Again, this is basically just intentionally charred. It's like charcoal, but of natural wood and not with any kind of weird like additives. And it's, you can learn more about it in another meadowscaping talk, or not meadowscaping, soil schools talk in a few weeks or a week from now, I think. But it's pretty cool and interesting. And you can see here, this is a series of photos where this person was trying to grow a crop with nothing and nothing lived, added biochar, and the corn grew up pretty decently. Added fertilizer, it also did decently, both of them together, and it was just like off the hook. So biochar is basically as good as fertilizer is what that tells me. There are plenty of, there's some challenges with this. I would say public perception is something that we're kind of always playing with when we're doing these naturescaping projects. Some people will think it looks all like wild and messy, and you can kind of do what you can, but also I'd say also don't worry about that too much. People are coming around, and the more they see the biological and ecological beauty of what's going on in your yard, the more they're going to be like, you know, it doesn't have to be cookie cutter. There are some places with tall grass ordinances, however, that, you know, you might have to just try to make sure you keep things shorter because they're going to say, no, you can't let it grow too tall. There's ongoing maintenance. I would say, you know, definitely don't count on just, you know, installing this and being able to walk away. You do have to maintain and weed things. Sometimes plant costs and availability can be challenging, but there are a lot of cool resources too, where people are, you know, sharing seeds or starts of their natives, and there's a plant swap from East Multnomah that's going on. And of course, grass ID can be challenging. Like I was just telling you with eyelashes on California oat grass, that's good, but it's still tricky. So it's a great area to learn more in. When you're sourcing plants, there's a few things to consider. A lot of things are sort of shopped around as like native, but they're actually native to like Southern California or Eastern Oregon or someplace that's not really like native. So it's good to ask more questions about that. I don't think this is really an issue with most of our native plant, like dedicated native plant nurseries, but there's the issue of neonicotinoids, which are an insecticide that's systemic in plants that some nurseries add that can be really harmful to our, you know, bees and native insect species. And yeah, there's a lot of evolution in this whole field of like where to get your plants. But there are some great resources on some of our websites around like where to find good native plants. So check that out. And I just want to end with a couple pictures of my native meadow here to just inspire you. So this is actually camas here, and some there's some yellow Western buttercup in the mix and some strawberries, obviously lots of ferns. Yeah, some bluebells. You can't quite see it, but there's these really cool Delphinia, the larkspur. You can just have a great fun with planting these. Here's a different view of another part of my yard. Now this one is a little more sloped, and you can see I put Knick-Knick along the bottom to kind of hold the ground while still staying short. And then there's the penstemon and Oregon sunshine going off into the distance. California poppies out that way. And you can see I kind of mixed in some shrubs. I was sort of, you know, adding a few more layers to the landscape here. And finally, this is one little strip along you can see this is my neighbor's yard. This is my yard. And in here, I just seeded some native seed mix that we were giving away, basically. And so you can kind of see what that looks like. It's a little more like just different species all over the place. All right, so just want to shout out to all of our great partners in this work who helped do some of the research and outreach and inform us. And that is it. Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to hearing some.
Well, Laura's internet lasted as long as it needed to. So hopefully it comes back so we can ask her some questions. So it looks like she's back. Hey, Laura. So we have
Oh, yay.
a lot of similar questions, and I'm going to focus on the ones that are a bit more general. Some folks are asking questions that are pretty specific to their site. First of all, a lot of people are wondering where to get that great manual for meadowscaping. And Scott put in a link to where you can find that. So that is in, if you look at answered questions, that's where the link is living. It's on
Oh,
West
cool.
Multnomah's website. So I just want to make sure people saw that, because that's going to be a great resource. A question that's come up quite a bit is where to find these plants. And you touched on a little generally, but can you talk a little more about specifically where, some of the people are saying they're having a hard time finding things like oatgrass.
Okay. Yeah, so that one you probably won't be able to find as starts from a native plant nursery, as far as I know. But I got my seed from Silver Falls Seed Nursery, and they were able to send me like a little 5-pound bag of California oatgrass seed. I think it was like 5 pounds, or maybe even less, maybe like 2 pounds. You can get seed in small enough amounts for an urban yard, though. So that is one of the tricky things, because a lot of our local native seed nurseries are, wholesale. They want to sell in large amounts. But yeah, so Silver Falls Seed Company is one. Steel Acres is another. ProTime Lawn Seed. So these are all seed companies, by the way. And they do have, a lot of them have native and non-native. So you have to kind of be careful about that. But they serve many different purposes. Oh gosh. Let's see, there are some other ones, but so that can get you started. Feel free to email me and I can like share a full list. I hate forgetting companies, because I know we're not supposed to like prefer any one company here, but I just want to get you guys started.
Our website, we're currently developing a directory for conservation services. And so we're hoping that that's going to launch like within a couple weeks. And I believe that that directory is going to also include a bunch of lists of nurseries. So definitely keep your eye out for that.
Nice.
You had mentioned one law, and someone asked about that. Someone said, are there any local laws or zoning regulations that will impact the planning and implementation process?
Okay, yeah, there are a couple. So I think, I wish I was, so I will say I'm not a lawyer. But yeah, there are some tall grass ordinances, and I don't know like the specific law name or anything. But it's really, I think that one's about fire risk specifically. They're worried about tall, dry grass catching fire, which is more and more of a worry. It's something you don't want to happen in your yard, for sure. So, yeah, unfortunately, I can't like add a whole lot more than that. But I did mention a little bit about rain gardens as well, which is where you dig a little bit of a shallow depression in your yard and you direct water in there. And you do want to just like get your ground like surveyed for utilities. So the call before you dig 811 number, make sure you do that. And there might be stuff you have to do to talk to your sewer company about disconnecting your downspout, stuff like that. But yeah.
How do you know when the old lawn is fully killed after sheet mulching?
Great question. So, when you're doing sheet mulching, I think actually like fall, winter, spring is kind of a good amount of time. So partly it's the amount of time, and I like the winter because there's more moisture, which means there's going to be more active decomposition going on. If you try to sheet mulch through the summer, things might just be kind of like dormant, but not fully decomposed. But the best thing you can do is give it that good amount of time and then watch for any new things growing up through your sheet mulch. And you can also just like dig down into the ground and look for live roots, because really your goal is like killing the roots all the way.
How do you feel about dandelions?
Oh,
Are those weeds or not?
I know there's like a whole there's a whole controversial like philosophy battle over dandelions. I personally think if what you're gonna have is like the standard weedy Portland lawn, dandelions are fine. I don't care. They do feed pollinators, and if you want like low maintenance lawn, like letting your lawn go like super weedy is is one way to kind of provide a few of the benefits of meadowscaping without really hardly any work. However, when you let them go to seed and they're flying into my garden where I don't want them anymore because I'm trying to promote more diverse native plants, that's kind of the downside there. So, if you're thinking about your neighbors a little bit, especially if they have, I don't know, like really unique, diverse gardens, that's one thing to think about. But yeah, I mean, I let dandelions grow in certain places, and then just don't let them go to seed or, but yeah, and in my like meadowscape, I don't yet generally let them go to town.
Do you have any recommendation for species that do well on slopes and hills?
Yeah, there are definitely some really good ones. And I would say it obviously depends on all the other factors involved, like, there's just so many factors. But I would say if it's just kind of like a slope that you don't mind it being kind of like taken over by a robust plant, the Douglas aster is really nice. And I do have quite a bit of that on a slope in my yard. Douglas aster is interesting because it's this purple, like daisy looking plant. There was a picture in our slideshow, but it like sends out all these rhizomes that grow through the soil. And so it can really hold the soil very well because it'll just create this network that locks it in. But, then it's going everywhere. So but that's one. I would say anything with a big sturdy root mass. The Knick-Knick does really well. Oregon Sunshine, I don't see why not.
Do those do well in shady areas?
What's that?
Sorry, do those do well in shady hills?
Shady hills.
Sorry, I realized I missed that part of the question. Specifically shady hills.
Okay. Sword fern might be a good one because it can really withstand and protect soil pretty well. And I do see it growing on shady slopes in our area all over the place.
All right. There was a very pretty blue or purple flower on one of your slides. It was the slide about land trusts. Do you know what that flower was?
Pretty blue flower.
A purple flower. I think it was from pretty much the beginning. It was about 20 minutes in.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna mess with everyone if I click back through everything. Oh, was it this one or that one?
Difficult to know. Do you know what either of them are? You can share with us. People like those pretty flowers.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so we'll just do them all. This one is camas. This is the common camas, which is a super special flower. It's a bulb in a lily. It was one of the plant species that was eaten by Native Americans as a staple food. They ate the and do eat the bulbs. And then this one is self-heal. So that's what I can do.
Beautiful. It sounds like sourcing and identifying plants is where a lot of the questions come in. Do you think does that handbook talk specifically to the different types of plants that are good for different conditions?
Yeah, definitely. So in the handbook, I'll just try to show you. There's like a whole appendix. You can see here. There's a whole appendix that has like dozens and dozens of species, and we carefully went through and triple checked that like the conditions and size and height and everything were accurate. So that's a really great resource. And yeah, you can get the handbook as a PDF and look through it that way. And that's a great place to start.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all your time and expertise, Laura. Thank you so much to everybody who participated today. The recording for this will be up online very shortly. And there's so much talk about looking for places to get seeds that we'll follow up in an email with a list of all of those different outlets that you can go find seeds.
Nice. Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.